it really excited me to be able to start something that wasn't there before. Having that kind of impact where you're able to create something out of nothing and it provide value, I realized was exciting to me. And I think those were some of the initial seeds I've realized now of me wanting to go into entrepreneurship.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast, brought to you by MD Coaches, a company dedicated to developing and empowering physicians and other healthcare professionals to realize a greater potential and to achieve a greater level of satisfaction in their chosen fields. You can find MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com. Well, before we get into the show, I have a quick message for you from MR Insurance, a small business that helps physicians with their disability insurance needs. Michael L. Relvis is a CFP professional and insurance agent committed to helping physicians nationwide with their term life and disability insurance needs. He provides an objective, transparent, and education-focused process that aims to help physicians make prudent decisions and avoid overcomplicating things. He exclusively offers own occupation disability insurance policies for residents, fellows, and attending physicians. We know he'd be happy to help you with whatever your insurance needs are. You can find Michael at drpodcastnetwork.com/MR Insurance or contact him at 800-817-4522. Well, I have a feeling that when you hear what today's guest has to say about pre-planning for end-of-life care, you'll wonder why someone didn't think of this solution long before now. Well, Dr. Desh Mohan did think about it, and he founded a company for the express purpose of helping with that very difficult process. So let's hear Dr. Desh Mohan tell his story. Well, it's my pleasure today to be speaking with Dr. Desh Mohan, who is currently in Richmond, Virginia, a practicing hospitalist and the chief medical officer for a company called Koda Health, which we're going to talk about in some detail. Desh, it is a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Randy.
Well, what we like to do here is begin with your beginnings, and I noticed that you are an MIT graduate, and I have to say, if somebody came to me and asked me, where should I go to undergraduate school if I want to wind up in medical school, MIT would probably not make my list. So
it should probably be at the very end of your list.
Well, not necessarily, because it obviously worked out for you, but it brings up the question, when you enrolled in MIT, did you know that medical school was where you were headed, or was that something that evolved? What's the story?
Yeah, great question. So when I joined MIT, the thing that I was most interested in was basic science research. So I actually went to a pretty unique high school for my junior and senior year. I went to the Texas Academy of Math and Science, which is a 2-year program that's located on a university campus, and you take classes with university students. And so along with that came the opportunity to do research, which I was really interested in as a high school student, believe it or not. And so I got really involved in genetics research as a high school student, and that passion extended into college. And so when I was going into MIT, I knew which group that I wanted to work with. And that was my major driver for going to MIT. I wanted to have a lab one day. I wanted to be a basic science researcher. And that was my main motivation to going to MIT, actually.
And where did the inspiration for that come from? Do you come from a scientific family, or tell me more?
Yeah. So that definitely came from my dad. My dad is in immunology, and he has his own lab, and that passion and interest for understanding problems at a molecular level was something that was very interesting to me initially, and really kind of took me into my pursuits when I was younger.
But at that point, your vision for yourself, I gather from what you're telling me, is that it was more likely to be a career of pure research as opposed to clinical medicine?
Yeah, that's right. I definitely thought about medicine when I was going into college, and I considered it, but I definitely saw myself more along the lines of doing research.
So when did the turnaround occur? When did you think, well, maybe medical school is where I should be focusing my interest?
So it came in a couple of ways. One is, I think the experience that I had from a research perspective when I was in high school was phenomenal. I loved the group that I was with. I was learning a lot. The mentorship was wonderful, and I didn't really have as amazing of an experience when I was in college. I think a big thing that I noticed was research is extremely difficult. It takes a certain kind of person to have the certain patience that is required to have experiment after experiment not work out. And I was in this part of this research team for 4 years, and a lot of the work that I was doing wasn't very successful, and so that was disappointing to me. One thing I realized in that process was I was really driven by impact and results and seeing the difference that I was making. And along the same lines, as an MIT student, I gotten involved with a lot of development work in a lot of developing countries. So international development work was a big focus for MIT. And so I was part of a lot of projects in Tanzania and in India. And those projects happened to be projects with health systems or health-focused organizations. And through that process, I was able to, we were usually working on engineering-related projects or infrastructure-related projects, but I was also able at the same time to work alongside a lot of the physicians and see what they were doing. And that really got me excited. I really enjoyed seeing the impact that physicians were having on these patients' lives, and seeing the difference that they were making. And that ability and that ability to have that kind of impact was really exciting to me. And, you could see the difference that I was making, and it was just so tangible. And that got me interested in medicine and down that track.
So that's really interesting to me. You more or less happened to land in an area where you could actually see people doing, I don't know whether to call it pure research or not, but certainly valuable research, clinical research, in conjunction with clinical practice. Is that kind of where you were?
Yeah. It was basically the work that I was doing was not clinical research per se. It was more infrastructure and development work. So, for example, we were, setting up, IT systems for some of the rural clinics in India and in Tanzania. We were setting up and mobile vehicles that we're setting up off-grid solar systems for, so that it could power lab equipment like microscopes and incubators. And so we were doing some of that kind of work, but in the process, we're able to observe a lot of the physicians and care teams that were delivering the care itself.
I see. So it was the proximity to the clinical practitioners more so than the actual research that you were doing.
Absolutely.
Well, how far along were you at MIT when you had that experience, and how did you make the decision that you were going to apply to medical school?
Yeah, I think it's probably sometime during my second year that I started making that transition over and exploring other paths. I think along those lines, it kind of what's going in conjunction. The research I was doing wasn't going as great as I wanted it to, and I was getting disappointed and frustrated, and at the same time having these awesome experiences in another aspect of my life, and realizing that there are other possibilities and opportunities out there. So around my second year, I think.
And when you made the decision to apply to medical school, did you kind of spread applications all over the place, or were you ready to get back to Texas, or how did you make that decision?
I applied to a lot of the Texas schools just because Texas has fantastic medical education.
It's got a lot of choices.
Yeah, it does have a lot of choices.
It really does,
and choices that are affordable as well. So that is the other aspect that's great about the Texas Medical School, especially for in-state residents. But I also applied outside of Texas as well. At the end, it came down to I really loved UT Southwestern. It was close to home. I grew up in Dallas, so it was close to home. And I thought the medical education there was just excellent.
Well, I want to follow up on what was your sort of at first glance experience of medical school. You mentioned that although you thought you were interested in being a pure researcher earlier, you found out that there was something about that didn't quite fit. Once you got into medical school, did you have the feeling you were in the right place?
Yeah. So in medical school, I think the first 2 years are, it's given that it's still just basic science curriculum, it doesn't still completely feel like you're just purely in medical school. I loved the things that I was learning, and so initially I really enjoyed it, and at heart I love clinical science and biology, and learning all of these concepts were just really fascinating to me. And so at first, definitely, I think I thought that this was definitely my calling, and this is that I fit in well. I think that was based on the first 2 years of my medical school experience.
And then that leads right into the next question. You're one of the rare individuals that I've spoken to that felt comfortable during those first 2 years.
Yeah.
When you moved into the clinical years, did that change your enthusiasm in any way?
Yeah. I think it's only during my clinical years that I began thinking about whether this was the complete and ideal fit for me. So I think in your preclinical years, you're just learning and don't really have that complete experience. Only when you're really in your clinical years do you really have, I think, a proper exposure of just pure medicine. And while I really enjoyed it, and I still really love practicing, I always want practicing to be a part of my career. I think one thing that stood out to me was I felt like I didn't have as much of an impact as I'd like to. And I realized during my clinical years that even though that, I could see the impact that I was making on my patients' lives, and I enjoyed working at the bedside, working with patients, I realized that a portion of what drove me was being able to have a broad positive impact on healthcare that is difficult to have just on individual one-on-one patient care. And I don't think until then I realized that was something that was important to me. I think until that time, I thought that, seeing that kind of tangible impact that I saw, when I was observing physicians as an undergrad student is something that I received with just pure clinical care physician, but later realized that I wanted something more.
That's really quite insightful for a person that young. I don't know if you were aware of that or not, but I think a lot of us have heard and I can't remember who claims to have first said it, but there is this legend that someone speaking to a medical school class said, you should all remember that whatever you learn here, 10 years from now, 50% of it will be obsolete. And it sounds to me like you had the realization that even though you couldn't put your finger on it, we could be doing medicine better than we are. Is that possibly what was in your head?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing you brought up was spot on. Is I couldn't put my finger on it.
Well, you can only be so wise at that age,
Yeah. Definitely. There was something that didn't feel completely right to me, and I think it was at that time that I started to try to figure out how else I might be able to have this positive impact that I was seeking.
And so how did that impact your choices for your postgraduate training?
So I started taking some steps when I was in medical school to begin to explore what are different avenues a physician could have where they can use their training to make a difference, play a role, impact healthcare. And so, for example, I spent a summer doing some management consulting at McKinsey, and to
That's
see,
different.
Yeah, it is very different. I think physicians, a big thing that we don't realize is that we have a pretty deep understanding of our healthcare system that a lot of folks don't have, and there's a role to be played there of being able to use that training and understanding to guide larger organizations to impact the healthcare system and impact care in a better way. And so, I worked alongside one of the teams at McKinsey for a summer, but ultimately decided that wasn't the complete fit for me, the best fit for me. While I was in medical school as well, I tried to take some of the learnings that I had from undergrad, where I was working on a lot of international development work and sustainable development work, and I tried applying that to some of my work and some of my activities in medical school. And to that end, one thing that I realized was that as physicians, a lot of the physicians that I spoke with, a lot of the medical school students that I spoke with, it seemed like they had a lot of problems with what they were seeing in their day-to-day practice, but didn't have the skill set or tool set to understand how to solve those problems or how to even begin approaching changing those problems. And along with a few other students, we set up some curriculum to actually guide students to think about how you might be able to innovate and change deficiencies that you see in the healthcare system. So those are some things that I worked on as a medical school student. And I think one thing that I realized in this process of starting new things and doing new things is that it really excited me to be able to start something that wasn't there before. Having that kind of impact where you're able to create something out of nothing and it provide value, I realized was exciting to me. And I think those were some of the initial seeds I've realized now of me wanting to go into entrepreneurship. And I think it really started during medical school of understanding what was important to me and what I really enjoyed.
Remember medical school? You were confident, studious, hardworking, and you learned what to expect in all manner of patient care. Then reality struck. Regulations, expenses, staff management, and administration. Is this what we signed up for? Stress on the verge of burnout, no time for family, or the reason we got into medicine. Helping people. What are the options when you're afraid you're in the wrong career? Transition, teach, quit? What if there was another way? MD Coaches can help. We're a team of medical professionals with a century of experience in the clinical and business sides of medicine. More importantly, MD Coaches has been where you are, stressed and trying to navigate a world school didn't prepare us for. MD Coaches is your mentor, your confidant, to help you make your practice shine, navigate administrations, and successfully lead staff and projects. Or if you're ready to transition, we can help there too. MD Coaches is doctors helping doctors. Visit our website to receive a free, no-obligation consultation. Go to mymdcoaches.com/RX. That's mymdcoaches.com/RX. Isn't it time someone else was on your side? Don't let the business of being a doctor stop you from doing what you love. That site again, mymdcoaches.com/RX. Visit us today.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests, whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics. Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. Was this what you were doing when you were involved in that fellowship, the Digital Health and Design Fellowship?
No, that actually came after.
After medical school?
Yeah, after medical school. So, so after medical school, I began exploring this, in medical school. But ultimately, I realized that, while I had these interests and, I had this vague idea of what else I'd like to be a part of my career, I always knew that I wanted to still practice. I really enjoy clinical medicine. I enjoy working with patients. And to me, it really grounds me and helps me understand what's important and what matters. And so I always wanted to be able to practice at all times in my life. And so to that end, it was important to me to be able to go through residency. So I went to Baylor in Houston for internal medicine residency. And while I was in residency, was pretty focused on my clinical work. That was busy in and of itself. And so didn't really get the opportunity to explore a lot of these additional interests that I had begun to discover in medical school. And after residency, I was a little bit confused about what to do because I still hadn't completely identified what it was in addition to practicing that I wanted to add to my career. And so it was, a determination of, do I kind of continue down this track and after residency go into some fellowship or go and work as a physician as part of some system. And so I decided that I needed to actually make some moves to start to try to figure this out. And, I also didn't want to lose my ability to practice and my clinical training at the same time. So what I did was I started working as a locum tenens hospitalist. And what I really enjoyed about locums is that I think for myself, it provided two things. One is it provided some flexibility that I could explore other avenues to begin to figure out what really was going to provide that, I think, satisfaction in my career. It provided that flexibility for that. And the other aspect that was really important for me was it allowed me to see multiple different healthcare systems and see how medicine was delivered and healthcare was practiced across states. And, I was able to work in 10 different hospital systems in a matter of, several months. And that provided a very unique opportunity for me to see how healthcare was delivered in a lot of different places.
That's another thing that stood out for me on your CV, and that is that you apparently had that realization early in your life. I think so many people, even so many physicians, seem to think of healthcare delivery in the U.S. as something that is kind of the same everywhere you go.
Right.
And you were informed enough at that tender age to realize that there were a lot of differences from place to place. So what did you learn about that? What are the differences? What stood out for you?
Yeah, I think the major differences honestly derive from how systems are run and how leadership operates certain systems. For example, some of the hospitals I worked in at that time really didn't have great, pain management policies, and I could see one of the biggest differences I noticed from system to system. This is in the heart of the opioid epidemic. Was I could see, systems that really had an efficient way to deal with pain control and to deal with abuse of opioids, and versus systems that just didn't have any systems in place that were just really struggling to deal with this. And it all came down to how leadership and how systems operated and set up infrastructure so that their providers had an effective way to deliver care. And you could see the downstream consequences of it, where when a system does have something that's really really put together and really in place versus those that didn't.
I bet.
Yeah, absolutely.
As I hear you tell the story, it sounds to me like you could not have picked a better laboratory to observe that phenomenon than locum tenens. More than likely, in my opinion, and I really want you to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm thinking that more than likely, a hospital system that is having to resort to locum tenens means that they're relatively understaffed, and that probably gets the lion's share of their attention. Whereas if they had a stable medical staff, they might actually be able to work on systems and make improvements and things of that nature. Am I in the right ballpark there or not?
Half and half, I would say. You're absolutely right that there are certain systems that the ones that are using locum tenens are because things are in chaos and there's a lot of turnover. But there certainly are systems where things are going really well for them, and it's they're running a really good ship. It's just that they're growing really rapidly because of the great system and infrastructure that they're not able to build up their staff fast enough. And so you definitely see those differences between the systems that are being run well and those that are not run so well.
Well, that was obviously a valuable learning experience for you.
Yeah.
And at some point, you came to decide that it was time to invent a system for yourself. And this is where I want you to tell us about Koda.
So after working as a locum tenens hospitalist for a couple of years, and then seeing the way healthcare was delivered in multiple different places, and seeing a lot of the needs and deficiencies, really at this time, I decided that it was important to me to kind of get back to that search of what else I wanted to impact and how else I wanted to add to my career. And that's when I found the Biodesign Fellowship at the Texas Medical Center. So my team and I were part of this one-year fellowship program in Houston, Texas. And this was just really an incredible opportunity that I'd recommend to any physician out there who's interested in entrepreneurship. The Biodesign Fellowship is a one-year program where they recruit individuals from different backgrounds, physicians, business folk, engineers, to come together as a team to look at needs and problem areas in healthcare, and in a one-year span, identify a need, identify a problem, and then develop a solution to take to market and essentially form a company around. And so I was recruited into this one-year fellowship in Houston, and it was just a remarkable experience. My team and I, as myself and my two co-founders, Tatiana Fofanova, who's a clinical scientist, and Caitlin Cherry, who's a software engineer, were part of the Digital Health team. where we're able to go into the world's largest medical center in Houston, Texas, and essentially have complete access to a lot of these big hospital systems like MD Anderson and Houston Methodist and Memorial Hermann, and really observe how healthcare is being delivered. So we had the unique opportunity of essentially just being flies on the wall and just observe, how patients are flowing in and out of the system. We had the opportunity to interview patients and staff members, and from physicians to nurses to social workers, case managers, finance folks, to really see where things were breaking down. And in that process, we amassed a list of 400 different problem areas that we thought were critical in healthcare. And we whittled that down.
400.
Yeah, exactly. We spent 6 months in the hospital systems, looking.
Were you surprised by that?
Oh, not at all. Our healthcare system doesn't function that great.
Yeah, I think we could all agree on that. But just the capacity to identify that many focal points just kind of blows my mind. And I apologize for interrupting, so do go ahead.
No problem. In the process, we whittled that list from 400 down to the single problem that we thought was most pressing, and had the opportunity to develop a effective solution that might be ready, the market might be ready to receive, essentially. And the problem that we saw over and over again in the multiple different clinical venues and hospital systems that we worked in was the lack of discussions of what kind of care was important to patients that were in that healthcare system. So we spent time in the ER rooms and trauma bays and ICUs and in the clinics. And we spoke with very, very sick patients who were coming in and out of the hospital. And not once in that 6-month period of time did we see a physician or social worker or case manager speak to those patients and really understand what care was really valuable or important to them. And the downstream effects of the lack of these conversations were just immense. When we spoke to a lot of these patients ourselves, we realized that for a lot of these patients, they didn't want to be in the hospital system. They didn't want to be in the skilled nursing facility that they were. They didn't want to go through this vicious cycle that they kept going through, where they came to the hospital and then back to the skilled nursing facility or rehab and then back to the hospital again. For a lot of these patients who were seriously ill and in the last months and years of life, oftentimes what they really wanted was more comfort-oriented treatment and comfort-oriented care. But unfortunately, they didn't have the opportunity to express that. No one had really asked them. And what we realized was a lot of doctors and care providers were simply uncomfortable engaging in these conversations, and honestly didn't have the time to do so. And that's really where Koda was developed. We wanted to make it accessible, wanted to make this conversation accessible to all patients so that they could plan for their care in advance without burdening our healthcare system or healthcare staff even further. And so Koda is a simple digital platform that leverages technology to make it easy for patients to plan for their care and doesn't require a lot of input or time from providers themselves.
That's such a great idea. And I have to tell you, as I listen to you describe that situation, I think of the many dozens and possibly hundreds of times during my practice in general surgery when I was the troublemaker. During those years, we were at a point where it was impossible to get your care from a single provider. There were always multiple specialties involved.
Sure.
And my job was to do some kind of an operation. And then there were others. And the thing that disturbed me the most was the oncology patients who have already had at least one and maybe multiple operations, and a medical oncologist or a radiation oncologist comes into the room and says, okay, the next thing we're going to do is this course of chemotherapy or this dose of radiation therapy. And as a fairly experienced practitioner who had learned some things about the natural history of the diseases that I was treating, I got myself in a bit of trouble from time to time simply by stepping in with the patient and saying, you don't have to do everything that these doctors say. How do you even feel about all this? And as you might imagine, it created some tension between myself and my colleagues. Sometimes it even upset the patients.
Sure.
But my impression was that they were relieved that somebody had given them a choice.
Right.
And I'm wondering if this is exactly what you're talking about.
Absolutely. That is exactly what we're talking about. I think the stories that you mentioned are relatively common. I think that's really standard of care right now, where oftentimes we're in a system that we treat, and to not treat is not an option. And one thing that I think is interesting is that it's very difficult to bring these conversations up after a patient is seriously ill. So, like
Exactly.
an example is that in the game, yeah, exactly. In the cases you described, where a patient's already diagnosed with a severe or terminal illness, it is very difficult to have these conversations at that point, which right now are really most often when these conversations are had. It's right now it's when a patient's admitted into the ICU and you're actively considering whether they need to be intubated or not. Those are oftentimes the first time these conversations are ever had. And what's a lot easier and more comfortable for patients is when these conversations are had early on in the process, proactively, when patients are actually healthy. These are conversations that are recommended for patients to have on an annual basis when they're healthy. Everyone above the age of 18 is actually recommended to have these conversations, because you never know what can happen. And so our goal is to really change our culture and our approach to these conversations to make it easy for us to help patients plan for their care and change our approach to serious illness care.
So, understanding that the time to have these conversations is before one has to face the emotional strain of the moment, how does one and when should one involve themselves with Koda?
So we work with health systems and physicians who are interested in improving their current practice of advanced care planning. So we use the Koda platform in clinics where we have primary care physicians and geriatricians who are using the Koda platform for their patients on an iPad in their office to introduce their patients to advanced care planning. Patients are able to start this process in the physician's office, but this is a platform that they can access anywhere. They're able to go through it again from the comfort of their home and review with their family members. They're able to share their preferences with their loved ones, and all of that is automatically synced with their physician, so they're always in the know. And we also work with hospital systems who are interested in improving this process on a more global level. And so we fundamentally believe that providers should be a part of this process, but we want to make it easier for them. And we want it to be a tool where the Koda platform is able to do a lot of the heavy lifting of the conversation and able to guide and help patients navigate a lot of this conversation. but that providers are still involved in it if there are any sort of additional questions that a patient might have.
So, from the standpoint of the founder of the company, ideally, should the idea of Koda be brought to the patient by one of their treating physicians, or is it something that the patient should bring up to the treating physician? How does it work? How do they get into the system?
It is pretty rare for patients to bring this up on their own proactively. Most patients don't realize, understandably, don't realize that this is an important conversation that need to have and things that need to plan for. So this is most often brought up by the physician that we work with right now, the physicians that we work with right now. So physicians are a big proponent of encouraging their patients to go through this process, those who understand the value of it. And their guidance plays a big role in what patients do. They're the warm introduction to this conversation that is sometimes can be uncomfortable. And so definitely something that's guided and led by the physician.
So is the company marketing to physicians or to hospital systems?
Correct. Physicians and hospital systems. Exactly right. So we work with independent practices and hospital systems who are interested in improving their processes.
And do you reach out to these individuals and organizations proactively, or how do they find out about you?
So we're reaching out to health systems on our own accord. Our marketing team is, but we also welcome any practices who are interested in what we're doing to definitely reach out to us. They're able to reach out to our team by email or finding us online. And I'm happy to provide that kind of contact information if they're interested.
Yeah, I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that at the end. Desh, it's such an incredibly important step, I think, in making sure that the appropriate medical care is delivered. And I congratulate you and your colleagues for putting this system together. And I really look forward to seeing it blossom. I hope it will. And I'm going to be watching very closely. So thank you for sharing the conversation with us about your experience and with Koda. We're going to talk about that some more in a moment. But we're at the point now that I rather enjoy the most in the program, and that's where we give you an opportunity to give us some advice. So I'm going to close my mic and sit quietly, and Dr. Desh Mohan is going to deliver his prescriptions for success.
All right. Wonderful. Well, Randy, thanks again for having me. It's been a wonderful conversation. My 3 prescriptions for success are, first, I would recommend any physicians who are interested in alternative paths in their career to first take the blinders off. As physicians, I think we've always had this stay on the track mentality. Starting from undergrad, if you're interested in medicine, there's usually a series of steps you need to take to get into medical school. And then in medical school, you're really drinking from the fire hose with everything you're learning. And at the same time, you're trying to set yourself up for success and for a good residency, and then on to fellowship, and it goes on, especially in academia. And I think a lot of the time you get discouraged from veering off of this track to explore. And I get it. It's scary to get off the track. I think for me, the time I've taken to explore has made me appreciate and love being a physician that much more. And it's also allowed me to find a passion in how I hope to make an impact on patient care. I actually interview students for MIT, and this is the one piece of advice I give to them. It's important to take the blinders off and explore. I think you'll be very glad that you did. The second prescription for success is to write things down. I think for physicians who are at the early stages of trying to figure out how to bring additional satisfaction to their practice, There are a lot of thoughts that come in about different options and possibilities, and it can be very confusing to the point where it's easier to just stay on the track that you're on. And I think taking small steps can really help. And the thing that really helped me the most was to get those thoughts onto paper. It helps make dreams and ideas more concrete so you can actually take some actionable steps towards them. And to that end, for physicians who are interested in entrepreneurship, the first step in the innovation process is identifying needs. And I think it's really important that physicians don't take for granted what an opportunity they have to identify needs and problem areas in healthcare from their firsthand daily experience. That's so valuable and very difficult for a lot of people to obtain if they're not in the healthcare system. But I think the important piece is to make sure to write it down. I think the most helpful thing I did was to write down all the needs that I identified since I was a third-year medical school student. It's now a very long list, but it's helped me find direction in my journey as an entrepreneur. And the last piece of advice and prescription for success is don't lose sight of the big picture. I think it's helpful to think back to those personal statements we wrote for medical school and think about what inspired us to go into medicine in the first place. For most of us, it was so that we could really help people. I think in the day-to-day busyness that we have with all the components of healthcare, from billing and coding and documentation and all the other complexities, we lose sight of the big picture of why we're in this. I think for many of us, practice has gotten so busy that we're really not able to understand who our patients are and what matters to them. And to that end, I take some time, even when you have an overflowing patient list, to really sit down with your patients and just listen to their stories for a few minutes and understand who they are and what matters to them. It certainly makes me appreciate what I do a lot more. And those are my prescription for success.
Well, Dr. Desh Mohan, internist, hospitalist, and entrepreneur, thank you so much for sharing with us today. You have a fascinating story, and it really has been a great pleasure for me to chat with you today. Before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to tell our listeners where they can find you and where they can find your work. So if you want to share websites, email addresses, books, social media platforms, any place where you would like for people to look for you, where should they go?
So you can find more about Koda on our website. That's www.kodahealthcare.com.
That's Koda with a K.
Koda with a K, absolutely. KODA healthcare.com. Thanks for that. And you're also, I'm happy to give my email address out. That's Desh, DESH, at kodahealthcare.com. And you're also able to find me on LinkedIn, Desh Mohan, working for Koda. And if there are any organizations, physicians, health systems that are interested in the work that we're doing at Koda and how they might be able to improve their advanced care planning processes, they're also free to reach out to me at my email address or also our partner's email address, which is partners@kodahealthcare.com.
Well, Desh, thanks again very much for spending the time with us today. It's been a great conversation, and I'm grateful that you were willing to come and be with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation today with Dr. Desh Mohan. Before we close, don't forget to reach out to MR Insurance Consultants, where their goal is to assist physicians in obtaining the most comprehensive coverage available to fit their unique situation. Reach out for both excellent and quality service at drpodcastnetwork.com/MR Insurance. And that's a wrap for another episode of Prescription for Success. I want to encourage everyone to become a subscriber to the podcast Also, look for even more information about our guests in the show notes at rxforsuccesspodcast.com. We look forward to getting your comments, and we hope we earned a 5-star rating today. And finally, please consider becoming a patron. Just visit patreon.com/RX for Success podcast. Thank you so very much for listening today, and don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.